Eventually they changed into the Woodland time period people. I'm sorry you can barely see this, but if you want to shine a light on it, you can. The Woodland time period people was a little bit different. Now we got a couple of plants and we got some food sources, so they're starting to discover burials that's about 64 years of age here. So they went from 25 to 64 because different nutrients. Now, we talked about, nuts and berries and small plants, but what else was of nutrients back then that they could have used for nutrients in the woodland time period? Start thinking a little larger. Corn, okay, what else?
Fish.
Yeah, okay, but something they could plant. We got corn, pumpkins, gourds, beans, she's got it. There's one more that we eat. It's yellow. I love it with pesto. A little something yellow. Cousin of squash. There you go. Corn, beans, and squash came into the area. And we know them as three sisters because they would grow the corn in the stalk and the beans would wrap around it so they didn't need sticks, and the squash would grow at the bottom. This helped them live even longer. Do you think that corn, beans, and squash was good to their civilization or bad?
Good.
Good. Why was it good?
It was healthful.
Okay. How could it be bad?
Keeps them from being nomadic.
Okay, keeps them from being nomadic, but what happens when you buy a house? When you buy a house, what's something that comes with it?
Termites.
Termites?
Mortgage.
Okay. Mortgage.
Responsibility.
Responsibility. But think about the land. We know most of the time when we buy a home, we have land that comes with it. When these prehistoric people start having corn, beans, and squash, they start noticing, hey, this is my land. And then with that, you start having classes. Because some people had more land and better land to grow corn, beans, and squash, meaning they could trade more, get more items, where some people didn't. So then you start having people stealing corn, beans, and squash. So then that goes up, poverty goes up. And then you have a chieftain that's born. And your chieftain or chief would be over these sites, these small sites on the river. Because what he would do is say, okay, you guys, I'm going to attach you some corn. I'm the chieftain. I attach you guys some corn. I put it in a nice safe place. And when it gets really bad and we don't have anything to eat, I say, let's do a ceremony. The gods gave me this corn. I distributed it back to you, kind of like income tax. I distribute it back to you, and then I'm the man. And that's how it used to be back then. It's very simple. But not only was that important, but these people started having more time on their hands. Because you got corn, beans, squash, pumpkin, sunflowers. So what do you think they done with their time? Weaving. Okay, we did find cave mat impressions here at Russell Cave. Okay, they did find baskets here. They had a basket with seeds that was stolen from the site. What else?
Pottery.
Pottery. She's a smart girl. That was the main thing of the woodland time period. There was pottery left here at Russell Cave, about 2,000 pieces of pottery here. Okay? But let's see. What else would a child do in this time? Games. They started having games. You can barely see it, but that little girl is holding this hoop game that you guys can play with once we get back to the visitor center. What it is a long bone that's whittled down, and then they used to hoop little phalanges or any kind of bones onto that because they had more time, okay? More ideas are being made. Now, who watches CSI? No one. I don't need it, but it's a good reference. All right, in the excavation site, They're excavating and they're excavating, and they come down to this burial. Not the 64-year-old woman, but a burial with a spear point lodged in his back. He was about 30-something years old, about 5'6", pretty fit guy, but he had a spear point made out of quartz crystal in his back. Now, what did they use? Do you guys know what kind of spear points or rocks that they used in order to make spear points? What was it made out of? Flint. So why was a quartz crystal spear point in his back? Come from somewhere else. So think about it. Did they raid another village, or was they raided by another village? Because corn, beans, and squash is here now. Maybe it was a lean year. Now let's think about this. If we think that it came from somewhere else, which is true, because that quartz crystal is not in this area. It's up in the Chickamauga, Georgia area, and then it's lower a couple of hours from here. So this area, we rarely find quartz crystal. They didn't use it. Now, let's think more about the burial. His head or his skull was facing out to the cave, and his body was facing to the right. Now, his skull was polished. How do you think his skull got polished? I mean, it was white, like you would buy it out of a store. How is that, and why?
Boil it?
What's that?
Did they boil it?
No, they wouldn't boil it.
Water?
Well, not water. What happens when you touch something for a long time? You touch a CD player. What happens? The numbers start move. Just removes off of the CD player.
Ew.
We got the oil on our hands, so anything you rub for a while, you'll start to see that. Okay, so they were worshiping most likely. They probably done ancestry worship. Native Americans believed that the worst thing to do is to leave a comrade or a friend out in the battlefield. They might have went to war. They didn't want to leave him behind. They brought him back, and years later, they would start worshiping him. Now, at the same time they were worshiping him, there's a burial mound here that has 11 bodies in it that was buried at the same time. Why do you think they would have a burial mound with 11 bodies, and they were erect just like this, and then they're still burying people here?
Was he filled with dishonor?
Yeah, well, I don't know. Maybe there was another group here. Maybe that was an elite family that was being built. You just never know. Those are those questions you'll think about in bed tonight. Well, maybe. Now, after the Woodland time period, before we move on to the demonstration, you had the Mississippian people. Has anyone ever been to a mound site?
Yes.
What did you guys see at that mound site? What was the structure of a mound site? Round, okay. Did you have flat? Did you have flat land at the beginning? Open land, pretty much?
Yeah.
And then you had your mounds. What did
Yeah.
they tell you those mounds represented? They didn't tell you. That's why
Weren't that where people lived and where the worship center was? and
worship
everything?
centers and chieftains lived there. Now, why would they waste hours upon hours of time to build a mound to live on when they could just live on the ground? Not quite. Why do we waste tons of money to build large buildings? What's that?
Great views.
Not great
Protection.
views. Not protection. Think 9/11 World Trade Center wasn't protected. Now, if you went to Paris today, what would you go see?
Eiffel Tower.
Eiffel Tower. Okay. So if you went to, say, New York City, no, Chicago, what's the main thing you would see? Sears Tower. Okay. What does those large buildings show what a community has? What wealth, power, exactly. When you go to Manhattan, you look up, you see all these large buildings. These prehistoric people was showing the wealth and the power. Think of the Egyptians. The first pyramid was small, and the next guy said, okay, I want something a little larger. And this guy said, I want something a little larger. And it kept getting larger. They were showing power structure. One of the largest mound sites in the southeast was out in Georgia. And it was Chief Kusa, and he had a large mound site. And he was a monumental chieftain, so he was over smaller mound sites. So think about New York City. He was like Manhattan, and then he was over Brooklyn and all of that stuff. I love New York City, so that's my reference. But it was very important. Now, let's talk about this. So now we know they showed power. They had trading. Their lakes and their rivers were like our highways and our back roads. What about marriage? Do you think prehistoric people got married to one another? Maybe so. They did. How did they show that? Do you think they went to Zales and got a diamond? No, they didn't do that. When the conquistadors were here, they said that they would notice Native American women walking around the village with huge tattoos on their face of serpents and mountain lions. And these women were married to the chieftain. And they were actually one of the only women in the village, or the only one that could make rules, regulations, and even go to war. So they didn't have diamond rings, but they did have tattoos. They had piercings. These spacers you see kids get now, they used that 1650 AD, okay? All of that. So everything's going great. They got corn, beans, squash. They got bows and arrows, atlatls, blow guns. They have ways of travel. Why did they disappear? Disease. What kind of diseases? European diseases. What kind of European diseases? Smallpox, malaria. You guys ever heard of the book Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond?
Because I saw it coming here.
Great book. Now, the thing about it was not only it was the people bringing diseases over, but Mississippian people, they did not have big game animals. They didn't have cows. They didn't have any of that. So pigs and all of that was bringing those diseases over, and these people were dying a lot. And 90% of the people in this area died, okay? So what happens to the 10% that's left?
Scattered bands without a form of culture.
Scattered bands without, okay, a form of culture. Does history repeat itself? So if they were paleo small band people then, who do you think these people turned into? We know them. We've heard of them.
Tribal Native Americans.
Which are
Cherokee.
There we go. Now, although there's, like the movie said, there's not a huge link to the tribal lineage, that's the only thing that was left when they came back. So the thing about that's important about Russell Cave is right now, I mean, standing here, you're standing in the same spot where people loved, they died, they cooked, they cleaned, we know that for sure. I mean, this was a culture that was very important to the southeastern history. And they weren't primitive. They're not primitive people. They used what they need. If they needed it, they made it. We don't have, think about it. At one time, we had big gas guzzling cars, and then the gasoline went up. So now we have little hybrid cars and that little ugly smart car, because we want more gas mileage. Now, 10,000 years from now, someone may say, why didn't they make those cars a long time ago? Because we didn't need them. And these people had what they needed. They had the shelter, they had the water, they had the plants, the animals, and they had each other. So that's why we have to preserve places like Russell Cave, Chaco Canyon, Ocmulgee, and any other national park that's very important to our history.